Well, everyone, if you remember in this video, I talked about the things that I need to personally and professionally improve on in my career. So one of the ones that I wanted to talk about is specifically how I improved my one-on-one meetings. How did I take notes? So I wanted to kind of share the structure because at this point it's been about 3-4 months since I've used this structure, and I found it very helpful to be able to keep things on track and prioritize certain items that I wanted to do. So I'm going to share it. I'm not actually going to share the actual notes because it does have confidential items, but I will show the structure here. So it's basically the same exact thing minus like my manager's name, and it looks like just my manager's name is the only part that I really can't share here. But okay, so moving forward, I'm going to show you this. It's actually a Google Doc that's attached to my Google Calendar. So both my manager and I can see this, and it's attached to the invite itself. So no matter what, you can't lose it. It's on the invite. I have it structured where it's actually the same document for all of them. So that way it's like a continuous document with just broken out by the dates. So I have it broken up to these areas, and I'm going to explain them as I go. So the very first one I have is personal. This one is just kind of like warming up. You're talking to your manager about like, how's life? How are you feeling? And my manager actually likes to ask us for the number rating of our feelings of the week. And it could be like work related, personal related, but it's a good way for her to have a sense of how we're feeling. It was all her idea, and I actually kind of like it because it gives me an idea of like, am I better or worse than last week? And it gives me a way to kind of reflect like, why am I feeling that way? Because we did talk about that as well. So in this case, I'm going to put in some like sample information so it has a way for you to visualize in this actual structure as well. Let's say rating of 7. My default usually is like a rating of 7. If it's like better, it's like 8, 9, 10. If it's worse, 6, 7, 6, 5, and it hasn't really gone below that before. And this has actually happened even before this meeting structure happened. So this has always been the question that my manager always asked me, and I actually kind of like it. Right after that, I actually talk about how I feel and what I've been going through personally, as well as like personal initiatives that I have at work. So this doesn't mean like, oh, I'm feeling inundated because of cat sitting, which in this case actually would be the case here because it's Memorial Day weekend. But it could also mean things like, oh, I'm revamping like the awards program that we're doing here, or I'm hosting like a fun game night at our office here. So these are like personal items that are not necessarily professional, but they're still work related in some ways, but also some are personal. Like for example, I just came back from a vacation, or planning this, going out of office for this conference, and talking about this is like literally the only section where if it's not work related and it falls under like a other category, it goes here. So in this case, I actually wrote down, and this is the one that I have for May 23rd, by the way. I wrote rating of 7, and I also said like busy for this weekend. It's Memorial Day weekend, and because of this, like I'm overwhelmed. And then I talked about revamping the program for the OKR that I'm working on. I'm not going to give into details on that, like still organizing the Retail Culture Club's summer social, something like that. Then the section right below that is planned. These are topics that we didn't cover last time or need to cover. So probably they were either didn't capture from the last meeting and we didn't have time for it, or that like maybe something that I asked a question on and she needs to get back to me on, I put it there as well, so that way we make sure we cover it. And sometimes it's just like important conversations that we want to make sure we cover that technically is not as important as the others, to make sure that it's at time. So the planned section, the topics we didn't cover last time or need to cover, are usually things that like have either we forgot to talk about for last week or things we really need to talk about for today. So in this case, it could be like career conversations, promotions, like performance, or anything specifically, like maybe even questions I need to ask that I have to ask so we don't forget about it, because my one-on-ones with her are only 30 minutes or so. And in this case, like there's not a lot of time. Ironically, it's like before I have this structure, I actually had a lot of time. We always finish ahead of time. But this one-on-one, like because of all the way that it's written down, there's a lot of content and it makes me remember what to talk about, because before I didn't have one. So this is a really good place to put in all the questions that are like dire need of answering or we just didn't cover from last week. Then right after that is urgent and important for escalations. And generally this means escalations on the client side of things. Like maybe something came up with a client and we are stuck, like there's a blocker. So I would have to explain the situation to my manager, and she would either figure out like how to unblock it or give me some advice. So there have been one time that like I actually had something on here. I actually do have escalations, but I don't put all escalations here. I only put the escalations here that I actually think is important, because there are escalations all the time, but the one that I want to focus our attention on, I put in here. If you are in a job though where you feel like everything needs to be resurfaced so the manager's aware of it, I would put it here. But in my case, like, it's easy to escalate, and the reasoning for the escalation is not always valid or always worth escalating in some ways. Sometimes it's like escalating for feedback. But the ones that really matter are like if there's a revenue impact to it, if it isn't resolved in time. Then right after that, I have something called insert manager's name item. So it's whatever she wants to put in here that she wants to cover. So it's in this case like client highlights or insights to share. So there's that section, honestly, I've realized like hasn't really been filled out that often, but it's a good place to know that like, oh, if they don't have anything for you, you're good to go. And right after that, I have a whole section for client work. So just to give you some perspective, I am actually on shopping and hotels, 50-50. So I actually have two sections, one for shopping and one for hotels. In this case, this is where I go into the nitty gritty with the hotels and the shopping clients, where I put the client name on there, I give like the update, and it's specifically like an important or crucial update. But if it's like an important, okay, so there's two things. One is if there's a crucial update or trend, I put that on there for a client. The other one is if it's a crucial or important client, I put everything on there. So like my big winners of my big customers specifically on my book of business, I would always have a section on there, whether or not there was an important update or not. It kind of prompts me to see what did we do, or like what about this client is high priority. This section is just a less so high priority because I have the section for the urgent, important escalations. This is more of, here's just a status update on these clients. When I go through this section, sometimes my manager's actually like, oh, you should share this to our director or VP or to our team. And then I would send that out as well. So it's a good way to have an idea of looking at your client work. And what I end up doing to prepare this section is I actually look at my calendar, and I look at it because I'm a very visual person. I need to look at my calendar to have an idea what I actually did. If you ask me what I did yesterday, I'm not going to remember it, because sometimes I could be working on a very good, very important client, then I switch over and I kind of forget about the client. But I only remember about it when I have when I look at the client. I don't know how to explain it, but when I actually know, oh, client A has this important thing. Then I pivot over to client B. I forget everything about the other clients. And then when I'm done with client B, then I immediately go back to client A. So I have a really 0 to 100 focus between clients. But once I'm away from a client job, then I go look at the other one. I'm like, okay, I have an update for that. So when I look at my calendar, I look at, oh, I have a meeting on this, and I immediately remember what's actually going on with that. This is a reason why I have this structure, because I tend to forget what I actually did. Nothing wrong with it at all. It's Monday morning. People ask, how was your weekend? I have to think about what I did in the weekend. It's not like I did anything that inebriated me, but that actually made me forget what I did. But I just simply need to remember and recall by looking at my calendar, and then it jogs my memory a little bit, because I'm the type of person that really goes in when I go in. And I think it's a good thing, because then it means that I don't get as overwhelmed as much, because I'm focusing one thing at a time. But for me, it's all in. So for me, I actually think this structure really helps me to kind of sense what is going on. And in the long term, actually, it's really good too, because then that way when you scroll through, you can see what were updates back then, up to what date, what were things happening. And when you do your performance review, you can go back and say look, this is what happened. Because a lot of times whenever we're doing these performance achievement or performance reviews, we only think about the big updates. We don't think about the small updates. And a lot of times, actually, I realized this helped me, because I can scroll in and see oh, look, we enabled this thing on, even though it's small, but it's actually a big impact. Or I can find the date when something specifically was turned on, or maybe when they onboarded onto a pilot, I can find the date because I have it all in this one doc. So that is one benefit of having it all here. It also gives your manager a good way to kind of reference it in the future. So when they're trying to write something for you, they can go back and see oh, this is all the things that you've done. But again, there's a little bit of a different of like urgent, important, which I generally associate it with something negative, like there's a revenue impact, this has to be fixed, versus client work, it's like negative and positive. Something happening that's on the negative side, it's just an FYI kind of thing, but no action really needed. The other thing is like client work on the positive side of like, here's what we did, great. And sometimes that's actually what prompts my manager to ask like, hey, can you send this email out so we could share this to the team, something like that. So moving forward, I also do have like client related work on here. So in this case, I don't have like a client associated with this, but it's a tool for the client. So I also have that on there as well. In this case, script is broken and where we were able to find a manual workaround at this time. So we're working on that as well. So it's not necessarily like a personal thing. I couldn't categorize that as a personal thing, but at the same time, I didn't categorize that as a client work, but I have it under the client work here because it technically affects clients because it's a tool that generates a report for the clients, but it's not associated with a specific client. So I have that under a section for hotels, but I don't actually have that under a client. Then after that, I have open items. So that's just more of like openly items of things that are not that as important. I haven't had anything in that section in a while. Open questions. These are generally like random questions of how do the stocks vest? How does this how do promotions at Google work? Or how do I get more involved in XYZ? Like those are open questions that are not as important, but they're like questions that I just have. So I add that in there so I don't forget to ask. Then the last one's career development. This one has actually been something that's been added more recently. So just some context, I've actually got this manager back in like, I think September, something like that, because I was joining into the hotel space that made me move to this team specifically. So because of that, she doesn't know that much background about me, so we had this section where she's going to learn about this section. Before it was more about like, let's revamp into hotels, let's learn about hotels, but we didn't have so much about like a career conversation about what I'm looking for and what she's looking out of me and vice versa. So specifically that section has been kept open. In my case, I can actually share what I wrote here. It says doing 101. So the good thing is like at Google, I actually have the opportunity to schedule one-on-ones with like either a lunch or coffee chat. And sometimes I even add in like my client meetings as well. So in this case, it could be like meeting with the AM, the account manager for a client, and I would put that on it as well. So it's an idea of me learning about what their work is, but at the same time, it's a good way to put in anything I have on there. So maybe if I found something specifically interesting, I would put that on there as well. But because this 101 is not just my manager, it's also someone who's basically a mentor trying to mentor me on my career, I have that section just in case I have that. So it's top of mind for all of this. So basically the way I have it structured is in a way where first personal, kind of like a little small talk about a little bit about how you're feeling, what you're dealing with. Then after that, planned, urgent, important, all the very important things that if it goes long, those are the things we need to cover. Then I have client work, which generally is like an FYI. And even if we don't cover it, at least it's on here so she knows what's going on. And then open items, open questions are generally like not that much important. They're generally not as important, so that's what's on the bottom. And then career development, which is on there as well because it generally is like a more open question there. So not necessarily too important, but a lot of times I structured it in a way where we're actually working with what the manager needs to know versus what the manager wants to know. And this has been like a work in progress. The first thing I did was I actually was talking to my friend Emily, and she actually showed me her structure. I liked it, but I tweaked it a little bit to work for us a little bit more because we work on different products in some ways, and our relationships with our managers are a little bit different as well. Then I shared this with my manager, and then she was the one that added like urgent and important, clear items, manager items, and planned items, and all that kind of stuff. So it has been working really well. I think the only change that I had since I ever did this was the career development part, just because it's been more in a conversations than recently because of the career conversations and the fact that she asked me like straight off when we were doing performance, like, what are you looking to do? What are you looking for? And that's going to be for a different video. All right, so let me know what you think about the structure. Let me know if you end up adopting this with your one-on-ones. At first I was like, I kind of want to keep it as informal as possible because then you feel more comfortable. You don't have to feel like it's a meeting. But in this case, it's actually really helpful because it helps me think about what I did. It's almost like a little report card in some ways of what I possibly did. And then that way I can transfer it over to like performance if needed, or share it with the team if needed, because then it helps me remember at the time what did I work on. And in some ways it also helps me too of knowing like what I did and like feel good about how I accomplished things, because sometimes I just put things down and I'm like, I just did my job, and then she would go like, this is really good, thank you for sharing with the team, and I'm like, okay. So it's good that I wrote it down, because if I did not write it down, I just talked about it, it would have been brushed off. But because I wrote it down, both of us know that it happened, and it's actually good for visibility in that kind of way as well. So let me know what you think. Comment down below if you have a structure with your manager and how you have it done. I think this is like the most structure I've ever had, because in the past I've done it very informally. It was just kind of talking about our clients, and it's like almost therapy. Like I would just be back then at Accenture, we didn't even have video call on. I was literally just gonna be like this, facing away from the camera, and then talking about my life kind of thing. But here at Google, it was a little bit more structured than that, because we have a lot of things going on and many different things going on, because it's not just the one client anymore. It's kind of a little bit of everything now. All right, let me know down below what you think. See you next time. Bye.